We're recording. Well, welcome everybody to this edition of What Works for Me Might Work for You. We're thrilled to be having Melanie Mulcaster and Beth Lyons present to us today on living, learning, and creating the Learning Library Commons in a virtual world. Before I introduce Melanie and Beth, I just want to acknowledge that we're all in various parts of the province and acknowledge that we're gathered in the territories of various Indigenous peoples. And we further recognize their stewardship of these lands in which we live, learn, work, and play. So it is really an honor to welcome Melanie and Beth. I'm going to read their bios, but I will also paste these into the chat box for us so that you can take a look at that after I've read them. Beth Lyons is currently the teacher librarian at Larkspur Public School in the Peel District School Board and is the vice president for the Ontario School Library Association. She believes in being open about her own learning journey as an educator and a teacher librarian, and she reflects on her time in the Library Learning Commons on her blog, The Librarian's Journey, and on Twitter. And I will paste in Beth's Twitter handle as well as Melanie's. So over to Melanie, who is Melanie Mulcaster, the instructional coordinator for libraries K-12 for Peel. A lifelong learner and maker, she's passionate about inspiring and empowering modern learners to discover, connect, innovate, and explore. So without further ado, I am going to stop sharing and hand you over to Beth and Melanie. Welcome both of you, and thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us today. Sorry, Beth.
That's all right. I'm trying to get to our, here we go. Is it coming up?
It's loading. There we go.
Yay.
So welcome everyone to our session today. And we really hope that, again, something that works for us, that might work for you. We don't profess to be the experts by any means in anything, but hopefully that we all will have something to learn together today and be a part of we'll build our learning community and grow together. And please continue to share as we go along. So the question, and the bit.ly there to our presentation is on every, Beth, did you put it on every slide or is it just there on the first slide?
Okay, we're still good?
Yep, still good.
Okay, maybe I'll just leave it here for now since we're gonna go over to the other one anyway.
Okay, so if you can move on to slide, yep, awesome.
Perfect.
So,
okay.
As of up until March 12th, we were all quite happy in our physical environments, but now we have to shift gears and now we're starting creating and operating out of virtual environments. So what does that really mean and what are the things that we need to consider? Beth is going to bring you through an interactive Mentimeter just to kind of get our minds on about the thinking that we will be exploring during this session.
All right, let's go back. There we go. Perfect. All right, so.
And I'm going to post that link in the chat box.
Perfect. So Mel's going to post the link in the chat box. If you have a second device, perhaps a phone or something, you can also go to menti.com and use the code that you see there at the top, 422901. So our first question is, how do you feel about the transition from a physical library space to a virtual library space?
Sorry, I sent the link just to Lisa Noble for some reason because of her apparently, but I just sent it to everyone now. I apologize.
Oh, there we go. Perfect. We'll maybe give it a couple more minutes there. And of course, there are no right or wrong answers. And I think everybody's feelings are changing day to day on this, maybe hour to hour, minute to minute. Maybe we'll give it about 10 more seconds.
Certainly, Valerie, I will share the bit.ly to the slides as well in the chat box. It's one thing I think we're all getting very good at is navigating 100 windows at the same time, or tabs.
Virtual Library Learning Commons. This one should start to come up as a word cloud, which are always my favorite to see. Flexible, that's a good one. Lost, oh dear. Sometimes I think we're all feeling like that. Oh, it's moving so fast. High tech, challenge, collaboration. Lots of flexible. Look how that's staying steady in the middle. Very cool. Non-traditional. Enhancement. I like that one. That's a cool word.
I like the I may need help with tech. I still need help with tech.
Yeah, absolutely. Reading is coming up. That's good. Important. Collaborative.
Accessibility is also very important.
We'll give it 3 more seconds there. Integrated, that's a good one. Community. Fluid. Ooh, such a good word. Fluid. All right, we're going to switch to our third and last question. What are you most looking to learn about in regards to creating a virtual library space? So kind of what was your goal in joining us today? What are you hoping to talk about, chat about, gain from this?
For those people just coming in, I'm placing the link to the Mentimeter back in the chat box.
And we can add the, I can take screenshots of it afterwards and add it to the presentation too, so people can see afterwards.
So Mentimeter, for someone who's never used it, it's a great collaborative tool that we can use to, it's kind of like a polling tool. And you've got, as you can see, Beth has done 3 different iterations of how we could use this with our learners. So hopefully that is one thing.
Look at this. Bravo, my friends.
Is it free, Melanie and Beth? Is Mentimeter free so people could just go in and create some of these themselves?
Yes, there's a free option and a paid option. I only have the free option, so this I made for free.
So it's awesome. It shows how much you can do with the free option.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So everything that Beth is doing so far was using the free option.
Yeah. All right.
Awesome.
Perfect. So we'll go back and add that to the presentation. I'm going to go back and share now. Thank you for all of that collaboration. And we're back in. Perfect. All right. So some things that we wanted to talk about, as Mel said, we were all happy and content and moving along in our physical spaces. And now we're looking at organizing a virtual environment. So kind of the idea of how might we or how have we transition from a physical space to a virtual space, and which areas of your library learning commons kind of are the most loved, the most used, the most active. What spaces do you want to kind of recreate or enhance with a virtual environment? And for anyone that's exploring the bit.ly, all of the images, most of the images, I guess, are linked. So this link on the right-hand side is the menu for my virtual learning commons, and it links to the actual site. So later on, you can go and peruse at your leisure.
So our guiding question today is, how might the library learning commons empower communities of learners in distance learning environments? So we're going to be talking about what types of content are we going to be putting in there, and what kinds of best practices have we discovered so far in our journey. Well, I guess we're still discovering best practices. So we're going to be taking a look at equitable and culturally responsive pedagogy. So when we're talking about content that we put into our site, we'll look at what types of digital resources are available to us, and what are our what we need to follow in regards to copyright. We're going to be looking at a bit of how can we incorporate a maker stance in our learning environments, and looking at participatory cultures and inquiry-based learning. So if you have, we would really encourage you to share any learning or insights or resources that you can share with us, or aha moments using the hashtag OTF small d LLC on Twitter, and we can definitely put that in the chat box as well. So
perfect. All right. So looking at culturally responsive pedagogy, our guiding question is, how are we ensuring that everyone sees themselves as honored and valued within the virtual library learning commons? And as we begin to create and curate an online space for our learning communities, how are we working to ensure that we're walking the same path as in our physical space? Are we centering and honoring diverse voices that represent our school community and beyond? So we've shared a series of 3 questions here, created by the subcommittee from PETLA, that will help guide our practice.
And PETLA is basically just the Peel Elementary Teacher Librarian Association, and we've been meeting on a bi-weekly basis to really discuss some best practices that we might have for our schools and for our learners. And
then on the current slide that you can see, we have some resources that are available to help us as educators. So each of these is a link to help you continue your own learning journey to becoming a more culturally responsive in your own practice, both when we return to our physical spaces and currently online as we curate the virtual learning commons environment for our students and for the broader community, depending on how your virtual learning commons is shared out. And it's important to think about what's your responsibility as a reader and as a promoter of texts that you're choosing in relation to cultural authenticity. And when we think about trauma-informed distant learning, the bottom right-hand box there, the 4 core priorities, I really like kind of keeping those in mind, the idea of being predictable and flexible, making connections, and empowering our learners as they move through our virtual space. And then we have a resource here with the Canadian School Libraries, just looking at the idea of how we can use the platform of the virtual library learning commons to model learning that pushes beyond the use of tech to consume media, information, and content, and to begin to spark our learners' interests and passions while they're creating media, information, and content. And this is kind of the crossroads of culturally responsive pedagogy and where equitable practices meet. Kind of the
Are you still there, Beth?
I am. Did I lose my sound?
Yes.
Okay. Where did I drop out?
Yes, you did. I was wondering if it was just me. I was waiting for one of you to say that there was no sound. Great.
You were talking about the crossroads.
Oh, all right. So I'll come back here. Perfect.
I was like, is this a dramatic pause?
No. Imagine. Is the screen back up yet? There it is.
It's perfect.
I was talking about the idea of using tech to consume media, information, and content, and put.
We've lost her again. Melanie?
Yes, I know. Hold on. So what will happen is in a second, if she doesn't come back, I will start sharing. Oh.
How's that?
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
we cut you off again, but I think we got your point.
Okay.
I don't know. So moving on. taking a look at equitable practices. So really our guiding question is, how might we ensure that the virtual library learning commons remains dedicated to equitable practices in order to work to include entry points for all? So really we're going to be taking things that we want to consider when we're using that virtual space is, what is the balance between synchronous and asynchronous learning, making sure that content is engaging for our learners and is accessible to them. What sorts of universal design principles are we using? How are we providing entry points for all? Are we ensuring that students can have access to our learning on any device, or using device neutral applications? And again, thinking about what do our students have at home with that low tech, high tech, or no tech application. And you can move on to the next slide.
All right, my sound is, I'm continuing to have some problems here, so I'm going to leave it on this slide, this view, instead of the presentation view.
That's
if that's okay with everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry, we have an unexpected knock at the door. Of course. So looking at synchronous and asynchronous learning, thinking of it as a continuum or a combination of tools and strategies, what might work for your learners. And we have two examples here for you to kind of go back and check out later. One is a fully synchronous playdate happening with a kindergarten educator, where they're playing online on video with families in small groups. And then the other, on the other side of the continuum, is, you know, presenting a video provocation to your students, to your learners, and then discussing it later in a synchronous environment. So, you know, the idea of synchronous and asynchronous can fall across a continuum, what works best for your learners, and then in your space, and perhaps how you are supporting educators within their spaces as well.
So when you are designing learning experiences for your learners, really we want to consider choice and multiple entry points. So thinking about resources, let's consider for many of our communities or many of our learners, there's not going to be a lot of resources at home. So what types of things are we asking our students to do? Are we taking in our ELL family considerations? So those at home that can speak English, or how are we going to provide those learning experiences in different formats? What kind of modifications or accommodations are we going to help, you know, guide our students through so that those materials become accessible? Thinking about the support level at home, who is available at home to help some of our students in their learning. So I'm really thankful for my son who's in grade 7, who can help my daughter in the grade 6 math that I'm apparently not able to do at this point. It's been a very big help. Thinking about academic challenges, how are we providing materials that meet our students in their zones of proximal development? And then consider their access to technology. Is there one shared device between 3 or 4 learners? How familiar are our students with the tech, and how can family members help out? You can head over to the next slide.
All right.
Awesome. And again, when we're talking about the choice within an activity, are we giving our students, you know, that low tech, high tech, no tech option? So here is an example of a choice grid that Tina Zita, who's another Peel colleague, and I helped to create. So, and there's another example there by Megan Roach, who's another Peel teacher librarian that you can check out. And again, additional examples. So Tina and I have started to create a website called bit.ly Bring the LLC Home that we welcome you to go look at. And there are templates on there that people can take and modify for their own use. Moving on, this is one of the things that I've learned a lot about this year in my role, is talking about digital text and copyright. So the guiding question is, how do we consider to promote literacy and share rich literacy experiences with educators, students, and families while maintaining copyright? So we're going to just quickly review the types of content available usage considerations. What do we need to consider when we're signing up or sharing different types of resources? Just briefly overview fair dealing and copyright, determining rights for sharing, especially with, we get a lot of questions about YouTube usage, and again, best practices when we're considering what content that we need to share. You can head on over to slide 15.
Mel, I'm wondering if we want to share from your screen. My sound keeps cutting out.
Okay.
And
Perfect. Oops. Oh no. I mean, oh yes. Okay.
Doing okay there, Melanie? Otherwise I can share from my screen.
I think so. Let's try it out. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. We were on slide 15, correct? All right.
yes, I believe so.
Good.
Awesome. Good to go.
Okay, so the types of content and considerations that we have, first of all, we have our board license content. So every different school board will have licensed content, whether it be access to database or media resources. And really, this is the content that we really that's why we put the little ribbon there. That's the best kind of content that we should be sharing with our learners, because again, this is purchased by the board. All those privacy considerations are taken care of because it has been vetted by the board, and we know that these are very appropriate materials that we should be sharing with our learners. Then we have our temporarily accessible license resources, and these are things like Tumblebooks and all these ebook platforms that we have temporary licenses for. We really need to consider, while these resources are often good, they may not provide the culturally responsive pedagogy that we require for our learners, and some of the Canadian content that we would need for our learners is not necessarily there because most of this content is again coming from American publishers. We really need to consider the terms of use that we're signing up for. What is the long-term implication? Are they tracking our students' data? Are they asking for logins? And we really need to consider that privacy piece. So before we sign up for anything that's temporarily accessible, we really need to carefully consider what indeed that we are signing up for. Then we have our personally licensed resources, and these are things like Netflix and Disney Plus. And again, these are resources that are not for classroom use. We have our publicly available content, which is basically anything that you can find on the internet. And we have to remember that all of this content is under copyright and that fair dealing applies. There's other publicly available content that we can find that's under the public domain, and that basically means anything that's older than 50 years, usually the copyright restrictions fall, and that's why we have access to all those really older texts that may not be as culturally responsive as we require now. And then there's information under a Creative Commons license. And again, I'd encourage you to take a look at what is exactly Creative Commons. Basically, Creative Commons, the creators have said you may use this content, but you have to cite it using different formats. Lastly, we have student and educator created content, and this content is also under copyright, and we just have to be cognizant of how we're sharing this information. And it really goes back to some of those forms that we sign at the beginning of the year. When we're talking about sharing within a private environment versus a public environment, do we have the permissions to be sharing that work in a public environment? Do we have those permissions to be sharing photos of students? In some cases we do, in some cases we don't, and we just really need to be cognizant about that. So when we're talking about fair dealing, and it's hyperlinked in the top corner in the title, two things I really wanted to be pointing out is best practices for us in the Library Learning Commons, and to encourage with our educators and our students is, again, we do have rights to copy or communicate short excerpts from a copyright protected work, and it is our job to remember to cite those sources and where we got that information from. And again, a short excerpt means up to 10% of a copyrighted work, or usually one chapter. And something that I try to reiterate with our learners is that that doesn't mean that, week number 1, I can photocopy or copy chapter 1 of a book and then take it down, and then the next week copy chapter number 2 and put it up the next week. When we're talking about 10% or one chapter, we're talking about it's a one-time deal. That's it. So 2 essential resources for understanding copyright and education. So that one is the fair dealing decision tool, and this takes you through step by step. If you have questions, it'll take you through step by step, and it'll help you determine whether or not you should be sharing that resource. The second one is Copyright Matters. Again, this is a booklet that has some key questions and answers that you can look for if you have questions about whether or not you should be using a resource. So when we talk about use of publicly available content, we really need to look for and read the terms and conditions of what we're signing up for and the privacy policies. So if we sign up for an account, what are we agreeing it to? And again, for those, if we're using an add-on or an extension, especially with Chrome, we really need to consider what access are we giving the application to our Google Drive and what kind of information are we storing in our Google Drive. So we really need to be cognizant that we're not, if we're deciding to use these add-ons, a lot of them, they will have access to our Google Drive, making sure that we do not have anything that should not be viewed by a third party. We really need to be cognizant of looking for references of age restrictions, personal data usage, cookies and tracking, and usage restrictions and licensing. And then again, most importantly, is how does this usage align with your board's privacy policies? I know in Peel, there's certain things we can share when signing up for a third-party application and things that we cannot share. So if that application is anything in that column that's saying that we cannot share, then we cannot use it. And again, at the end of the day, we want to just to make sure that we're protecting our students. Again, we really, when we're trying to gather content that's publicly available on the internet, we really want to consider the creator versus the collator. And I wish I came up with this idea, but I did not. That was Kirsten Anthon, who's another teacher librarian in Peel, that came up with this idea. It's not mine. We really need to consider who has created the content or who has collated or uploaded the content. And we really need, just because you can find it on YouTube doesn't mean that that person has the authority and the rights or permissions to share. So we really need to think critically and review before downloading and sharing. So an example, so we often get, how do I know if something is on YouTube and then I can share it? So some tips that we've created that seem to help some learners, and again, if anybody else has any other tips, please share them. So one thing that we can look for is there sometimes is a little check mark beside a person's or a publisher's name, and that, just like how you see that on Twitter, that can often prove a verified or authentic source. Another thing you can look at a YouTube channel is on the About section. So if no check mark exists, check out that section and really look at what other information do they provide. You know, if they provide other links, what does it tell you, and how does this information help determine credibility, whether or not you should be using this resource. We get a lot of questions about sharing read alouds. So we all know that there are a lot of read alouds out there, and we've linked up in the upper right-hand corner the Read Aloud Canadian Books program, which again gives you the guidelines and gives you the publishers that have allowed some relaxed permissions and the guidelines if you want to do a read aloud, what you should do. So for example, this is a read aloud on someone's YouTube channel. So it does the reading come from the publishing company's YouTube channel. So usually if it comes from the publishing company's YouTube channel, you know you're good to share it. Is the author reading the story? Can the link to the video be found on the author's website? So again, linking to the author's website, that means that they've given their permission. And again, sometimes you always, again, have to go check back with the author, because just because check back with the publisher. We have to remember, just because the author says it's okay doesn't mean that the publisher says it's okay. And finally, does the reader state that they've been granted permission to record the read aloud? So that is one of the stipulations in the Can Copy guidelines that we really need to be, before we begin reading, we need to say we have been granted access through Can Copy, through the publisher, to record this read aloud. And again, finally, you can ask the curator if you're unsure, and then you really need to consider whether or not, you know, all this extra work to use this resource, is this the resource the right one for you, or can you find something else that will do the same thing? Lastly is free book sharing sites, and we know that there are lots of those out there. And we really need to, I've asked people, is the publisher sharing the content? Does it fall under public domain? Is the author sharing an excerpt on their website or YouTube channel? And does the website or service state that they've been granted permission to share from the publisher? So these are sort of some guiding questions that we've been helping our teacher librarians with when they're asking about sharing book resources that they find online.
So it's really important when we're thinking about all of these things, which are really big issues, is just to keep in mind the idea of best practices. Is it age appropriate? Has it been vetted? Does it protect privacy? Does it follow fair dealing? Have you cited it? And when all of those things,
I think she's saying when all of those things have been considered, then yes or no, really make that decision of whether or not it should appear on your virtual site. And I don't know if she's coming back.
to those licenses.
I kind of filled in the blank for you because you fell off again. But
oh dear, life in the country is great. I love living in the country till we do a presentation. All right, so thinking about virtual spaces and maker education, how might we continue to spark maker education in our virtual spaces? And this is a place where we really need to consider equitable practices and thinking about what materials and resources, voice and choice, no tech, low tech, high tech, all of those things that families may or may not have available in their home. And really kind of thinking about a menu of making to meet families where they are and to meet them with their resources that they may have on hand. So a few examples, we can go to the next slide, Mel, there we go. Gathered together from a couple of different TL's websites.
Oh, Beth, we've lost you again.
So the first one is by, okay, so now Roundtree Public School through Denise Gilliand and Nikki Alderman. So I think they're doing this. Oh,
am I doing it again?
Yep. Oh. I just introduced Roundtree, so you can continue there.
Okay. The one on the right from Aloha has a maker menu based on materials. And then the one on the bottom is showing how families and students can then share their work through a Padlet of the making that they've been working through.
There's a question that's come up in the chat box. What is maker education?
So go ahead, Mel.
Maker education is really making, it's constructionism. So, you know, having the idea where students can express their understanding through the physical creation or manipulation of physical objects.
Awesome, thank you.
Are you okay to continue, Beth?
I'm good. I think you're next.
Oh, so we're next. The next slide. Have you done talking about everything?
I think we're good. Yep. And all of these are linked so people can go and explore.
So again, some other synchronous and non-synchronous learning opportunities that you can make through, you know, include in your virtual learning environment when we're talking about maker education. So Can Code to Learn is one of my favorite organizations, and they offer daily webinars that students and teachers can join for free. That you can join it and learn that they do a lot of coding and things like that, but not just coding and other different applications and platform. Maker Ed is a YouTube channel that has, I was on there again last night, different videos using high-tech, low-tech tools that students can explore using making. Of course, I think many of us are familiar with Hour of Code. Debbie Ridpath Owe is a Canadian author, and she offers a lot of maker experiences related to books on her site. She's a great one. And if you, this is something I came across the last couple months. It's called Coders North, and it's really looking at coding applications through an Indigenous perspective. Again, bringing that culturally responsive piece to, and really having our students aware of different perspectives. That may be more for a middle school to intermediate senior audience, but I just thought that was a wonderful resource to explore. Sorry, Beth, is this me? Okay, it might be me.
Sorry. This is still you. This is still you. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I'm trying to manage like 3 devices at the same time now, and it's not working out for me well.
It's good since I can't really be heard.
So again, so our last, I think we actually are going very well with time. So we're going to be taking a look at, so another aspect of our virtual learning commons is how do we how do we get students involved and participate in a learning in a virtual learning environment, and how do we really promote that inquiry-based learning? So again, how might the virtual library learning commons differ or offer participatory experiences to the school community that relate to equitable practices, culturally responsive pedagogy, and teaching them from an inquiry stance? So things to consider. So what different types of inquiry, how are we going to lead them? How are we going to structure that inquiry cycle? How are we going to provide that voice and choice? How are we going to meet them where they're at using the universal design learning principles? Again, the offer of the low-tech, high-tech, and no-tech applications, and a review of some collaborative and virtual tools for creating, sharing, and reflection. So Trevor McKenzie in his book, Dive into Inquiry, is one of my favorite resources. And this infographic, I believe, is linked to his webpage, where he has quite a few of these learning posters that are really great to help guide our practices when we're talking about inquiry. So there are 4 different types of inquiry, and we really need to think about, we need to begin with our learner in mind and really think, where are our learners and what type of inquiry might best support them at specific points of time. So we wouldn't necessarily start and throw them into a free inquiry if they don't have the skill sets. I know for myself, a lot of times I'm in between structured and guided inquiry. I flow in and out of those different zones, and perhaps once my students have a grounded sense of the inquiry process and how to bring them in, then we introduce free inquiry. And really, again, it's where our learners are, help us guide the direction of where we need to go. So again, that structured inquiry is that everyone is doing the same thing. The teacher provides that resource. The controlled inquiry is, again, the teacher controls the topic and identifies the resource, but there's a little bit more choice there, and the students will choose what to answer the questions. The guided inquiry is that, again, the teacher's still choosing, but the students design a product, but they might have more choice as to how they design, versus free inquiry, where students are choosing their own topics without reference to any prescribed outcome. And they really have, again, built that tool set so that they can ask their own questions and design something on their own. That's the epitome where we want all our learners to be at. I think that was actually your slide, Bev. I mean, Beth, I don't know why I'm calling you Bev right now. I'm totally nerve-wracked right now.
No, that was yours. No worries.
You're both doing beautifully well. Don't be put off by the failure of technology. We're with you, and we've got these great links coming in, and we're completely here. So, and there was a question from Laura about the name of the book and the author that you mentioned a little bit before, and it was Dive into Inquiry, which I have actually read, and which is awesome.
And then Inquiry Mindset is also by Trevor McKenzie and Rebecca Bathurst Hunt. It's more elementary based, so depending on which panel you're in.
Fantastic. Okay, Melanie, has that enabled you to grab your breath?
Yes, that's awesome. So the next is, again, now that we know, once we've considered what type of inquiry might best support our learners, then we have to consider how are we going to guide them through that inquiry process. Now, not all 4 areas of these the inquiry process, we're not always going to focus on all of those in equal components during an inquiry process, because again, it really depends on where the greatest area of need for our students is. So sometimes some of our students really need that help with the exploring and beginning that inquiry. Some of our students need more help in developing and investigating on where to find those resources, or how to process, or how to, get those graphic organizers going, and then building that skill set so they have different tools so that they can create and share their learning. So where our learners are, or what supports our learners need, will really help determine how we're going to actually structure that inquiry. And different approaches or levels of support will depend on our students' needs. So this is an example of a structured inquiry created by 2 teacher librarians in Peel. They did a Bitmoji webinar for us a couple weeks back, and in the upper right-hand corner, there's a link there to their webinar. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen the Bitmoji classroom. So this just is something that they created. So where it says click here, that's the provocation for Learn to get them really started to think about the resource. You can see they've embedded 3 different learning materials that students can watch or learn. So again, thinking about how we're differentiating those resources for teachers. And then here, if you click for Jot Notes, this links to a Google Doc, which forces the students to make a copy where they can take and structure those Jot Notes. So that is one example of how you might structure or lay out a structured inquiry for your learners. This is an example of controlled or a guided inquiry choice board. So again, this may be something that you may decide to do. So these are made using Google Slides. Again, this was credit to Tina Zita from Peel District School Board. She actually designed these slides. I just helped provide some of the content. And again, you can find these at bit.ly bring the LLC home. The templates are there. So if I think I can open, I hope this is linked. Amazing. So if I present this, so this is an inquiry that students could go through on dinosaurs. Okay, so if I click on explore, you can see these are all hyperlinked to different resources that students can explore on dinosaurs. So what do you see? What do you notice? What do you wonder? So if I click back on the home button, then we can go to create, and there's different things that students can do. I really like this one. This was from PBS Kids, I think, and just talking about creating shadow puppets of dinosaurs. Again, if we're thinking of that no tech option, that usually everyone has a lamp at home or a light source that they can make shadows with. I shouldn't say a lamp, but they should have a light source. The sun is, everyone has access to the sun. And if I go back home and if I have the reflect option, again, thinking about that assessment of learning for learning and as learning, what kind of opportunities are we having them to have reflect? So this link here, I think linked to a Google form where students can reflect on their learning. This link here linked to Answer Garden. So it's another tool like Mentimeter, just about questions. So that how can we drive that inquiry forward after this? And this link to a Padlet where students could take a picture and upload something that they learned about or created and share something they learned about their dinosaur inquiry. And if I go back here, click exit. Uh-oh, what just happened? Oh, it's loading. Is that good?
You're good.
Okay.
It's just taking you out of the one and into the other, I think.
Are we good? You see my screen again?
Yes, awesome.
Okay, so again, the templates can be found on this site here. So if I click on here, oh, I'm going to do this again. So this is the bringing the LLC home. So we have different curations of choice grids on different titles. And if I click the more and I go onto learning forward grids, if I click right here, this link here, this will allow you to make a copy of a blank grid like this, and then you can use it for whatever purpose that you would like to use it for to meet the needs of your learners. Okay, so I'm just going to wait till that loads.
So the next screen that's coming up, I think we'll have time to watch the video, Mel, because we're doing really well.
That is good news.
It is. So the next slide is looking at kind of a free inquiry where students and learners are kind of going in their own direction based on their own questions, their own wonderings, and looking at the power of a provocation, which is also from Trevor McKenzie's inquiry mindset. On my Library Learning Commons website, I've been doing story times where families have been watching on YouTube Live as I read stories. And then part of the website has different links for inquiries. And we did a collaborative inquiry last week all about plants and things that grow. So maybe Mel, you can click the video.
Okay. Okay.
It should be just embedded there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Beth, for preparing that for us today. And moving on. So these are, sorry, this is your side, Beth, as I continue talking.
There we go. It's probably best anyway. So here's a bunch of different kind of collaborative tools and considerations and things that you might be using, might be interested in using, might never have heard of before. I know as Mel and I were brainstorming some of these I haven't heard of or tried yet. So there's lots of kind of different ideas there. These are not linked, unlike most of the other images, but you can Google them and find them and try them out. Same with everything, it is going to depend on your board's privacy policies, what will work and what won't work within your board. So make sure you're checking with that because that's very important. And then maybe we could go to the Padlet, Mel.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just to add on to that, that some of these tools may not be as accessible to some of your learners. So again, you just really need to know your learning community and what they are ready for and what you've scaffolded them for them. For example, for Flipgrid, I know a lot of people are saying just record a black screen, because then we also need to respect the privacy of our students for some of them that don't, and we need to respect their decisions if they don't want their faces on camera. You know, with things like Padlet, do we have that feature to modify conversations that come in? So how do we use these tools in a moderated fashion? Again, are we providing tools that give our students that voice and choice and that different entry points? And again, are we respecting and protecting our student privacy? So the last bit, I think we are amazing. I have 4:48. So on the exit ticket, we're really fast talkers.
Great, because it will give us some time for some questions.
Yes, awesome. So there's an exit ticket here. So Beth, if you can paste that Padlet into the chat window. So some questions that we wanted to ask you today. So you know, again, so maybe there are some tools that you know that we may not know of. So what is your STAR collaborative go-to tool? So what is a tool? It may be tech, it may be non-tech, but what is a tool that is one of your favorites for learning? What is one learn or one thing that you know, or your wow that you had today? And what might be one wish that you would like to try next? That, you know, if we all have access to this Padlet, how can we build that learning community and really help each other out? Because that's really what this is all about. It's building community and making us stronger together.
So here people can just click on the link to get to the Padlet and can enter their responses.
Yeah, and if you're looking at the actual presentation through the Bitly, the interactive link at the bottom works as well, where it says exit ticket. You can just click that and it will take you straight to it as well.
Awesome.
Screencastify has become kind of a gold star during all this for a lot of people. I hear that from so many people for making how-to videos. Some people are using it for assessment, to send videos back to students, giving them feedback.
Some are having a hard time getting to the Padlet.
Maybe Ruth, do you want to just post it out here on the chat?
Yeah, so if you can't,
we can add it in.
Yep, so you can on it. Yes. That's what I'm trying to say. I am an authentic, messy learner, just so everyone knows. If there are any other questions, I mean, we do have 9 minutes left. We are here to answer. If there's anything else you would like us to talk about or show. Those are our Twitter handles on Twitter. So again, please reach out to us, share with us your learning. We'd love to learn from you. Again, we're all, while we may not all be in the same boat, we are weathering the same storm. I guess I could turn my camera back on now.
Awesome. Okay, so questions, anybody? That was a lot of information. Thank you so much, Beth and Melanie. That was a lot of great ideas. And also thanks to the participants who were putting some really nice links in the chat box, which I will save after the session and make sure that we can access all of those great ideas. Any questions? Where will we find the slide deck and links? That question has come up a lot. And even though we've pasted the link several times in the chat box, I would not worry about it, because you're going to get a follow-up to this presentation, and you will have the link to the actual presentation as well as to the webinar. So you'll have the slide deck and the webinar and some other links that have been proposed. I'm actually going to ask you to stop sharing your screen so that I can just share a screen.
That is, I can do that. Oops. Stop share right there.
As there is something, thanks so much. It's been awesome, an awesome session. Here is some information that people might want to pay attention to. We are going to be sending you a link to an evaluation form for this webinar, as well as we've said, the slide deck. And you can also see the archived version of the webinar. We are also inviting people to visit the OTF Connects calendar for other excellent opportunities. So I can put some of those links into the chat. In the meantime, I think what we'll do is perhaps turn off the recording, and then we can just have some free time if you guys are available to stick around just to answer some questions. So
sure.
Thank you again for being here, and thanks to everybody who has spent their time with us. It's been an awesome session.